Hello, this talk was given by our very own Tabitha Kabora from the Environment and Geography Department back in 2017 at the African Archaeological Research Day that was held here at York that year.
My research is looking at how we can use agent-based modeling of historical water management systems to try and understand how people interacted with these landscapes. So I'll be looking at putting the people back in the land using agent-based modeling. So the outline of my research, I'm just going to discuss, Senna had earlier in the morning discussed the area project, and I'm just going to add how my research falls into it. I'm going to discuss the issues of water management and irrigation, how I went around modeling the Engaruka system, what are the possible applications, and some ideas of where this work can go. So as Senna mentioned earlier in the morning, there are quite a large number of water management and intensive agriculture systems that are found within the East African region. They combine a wide variety of practices such as furrow irrigation, terracing, and drainage or flood farming. But Engaruka is of interest to us because it combines both furrow irrigation and terracing, but not only that, is one of the few systems that has been completely abandoned, and we still don't have an understanding of why this occurred. So it's quite a large system. It covers about 2,000 hectares, and historically it fed off of system of five major rivers within the Engaruka catchment area, which were utilized to support the irrigation canal system. And this becomes interesting because in modern times, the Engaruka apart from one perennial river, all the other rivers are more seasonal rather than constant. So Engaruka is believed to have existed between the 1200 to early 1800s. And this is important because one of the hypotheses that was put forward about why it collapsed is issues of salination and issues of drought. Salination from excessive irrigation and also maybe the possibility of drought driving out people. But when we look at data, paleoecological records, and these proxies that look at climate, we're seeing that this system was in existence through two very large drought systems. And actually, some studies are saying that it actually increased in use during this period. So that means that this is not the environmental factor that could possibly have led to its, in a sense, abandonment, as they say. So one of the reasons why we moved to modeling is because, again, we know very little about what management practices they employed in that system. There are no descendants of the community that utilized that system in the area, so we can't use oral traditions or any ethnographic information to try and understand what actions they were taking and why they were following such practices. So modeling allows us, therefore, to take other modern and historical practices that we have information on and try to simulate how those would have worked in the Engaruka system, and then see if this gives us an idea of how the system developed. But there are very many possible human environmental factors that could have led to this. So we have to narrow our queries down. And that's another aspect of modeling, in that you are simplifying very complex issue to focus on the main issues. So with the ARIA project, different people are working on different aspects. It's very interdisciplinary. So you're getting archaeological data, you're getting ecological data through the soil physiochemistry, soil geochemistry, and you're getting socioeconomic data from interviews and surveys, and we're putting all these together into an agent-based model to try and create a dynamic, interactive simulation that tries to put some of these factors together and understand how that system developed. So this is obviously a very simplified way of looking at it. And one of the problems people have with agent-based modeling is they say it's too simple. But this is actually the amount of data that goes in. Just to give you an example of what we're talking about when we're saying environmental data, we're looking at the vegetation, looking at sediment dynamics, we're looking at the hydrology, we're looking at the climate, in terms of rainfall and temperature. We're looking at the topography. And then when we come to our socioeconomics, we're looking at the decision making that's behind these practices. We're looking at what are the choices they're making for crops? What are the decisions they're making for irrigation? Are they also supplementing their irrigation and agricultural practices with farming, animal husbandry, and how does that affect their ability to sustain themselves and buffer against changes? So what we wanted to do is develop an agent-based model of the Engaruka system in the NetLogo platform. It's a simple enough platform that even I, a very poor user of computers, could handle the programming of the algorithms necessary. So what I was doing is integrating the physical processes of hydrology, hydraulics, environmental dynamics with human decision making. But there are various challenges. We're looking at an irrigation infrastructure and combining that with human decision making within a landscape. So you're looking at challenges of resolution, where you're looking at specific fields at a size of 6 by 6 meters. You're looking at canals with small to large canals, and then you're ramping up that scale to catchment size of something like 56,000 meters square, which is one of the areas that I was working on, what I focused on. And then you're looking at scale. When you work with irrigation hydraulics, you're looking at instantaneous rates of change. And then you're also moving on to daily rates of water and sediment discharge monthly. But when you're looking at the development of the system as a whole, you're now looking into decades and centuries. And that is one of the primary objectives of the ARIA project, is to look at this. How did it develop over time at a decadal, and a centurial scale? And then driving all of this is the limited information we have about Engaruka beyond the archaeological evidence. We're using the archaeological evidence to try and understand how this system could have developed, but we don't have the information about why they chose the practices they did. And this is why, again, I found that it is really important to use modeling, because you can put in different human decision-making and try and see what is the possible range of outcomes that could come from different decisions and different combinations of decisions. Yeah. But again, with these challenges, it meant that I couldn't just work on one model. I had to work 2 different scales, because the irrigation infrastructure, when we're looking at, I had 2 questions. How did the system develop? But not only that, at the archaeological scale, how are the communities able to build up these very high levels of sediments within a field system at that period of time? And that necessitated building 2 models. So one that focuses on the sediment transport and the sediment dynamics, such that you can try and understand archaeologically how the sediments were trapped and how they were dispersed throughout the field system. And now looking more at a catchment level scale, the landscape dynamics involved in water management. So the first thing I did is a very small sediment transport model that looks at a very small selection of fields. Each of these fields is 6 by 6 meters. But over a period of 100 years, they built up this 6 by 6 meters to up to 70 centimeters in some places depth worth of sediments. So what are we looking at when we look at water discharge rates and sediment discharge rates when it comes to influencing this? And what are the primary environmental factors that we can see that would have influenced how long it would have taken for these sediments to have accumulated in this field system? So I modeled a couple of scenarios, but the one I want to focus on is when you have a constant availability of water. This is, in a sense, as a control. In hydraulics, you just use it to say you're going to have X amount of water flowing through a system every day, all day. There are no limitations on how much water is available. There's going to be water available always. But that's not in an actuality. We have seasonal variations that would influence how much water is available not only on a day-to-day scale, but on a month-to-month and a year-to-year scale. So first of all, looking at the month-to-month scale, you can see that when you have a constant water availability, the line just plateaus. And when you have seasonal, you can see these seasonal variations affecting how much sediment is accumulating. And then this goes on further to tie to how much does the soil depth change given these differences. So, and I'd like to draw your attention to the one that looks at seasonal variability, the bottom two lines, and long-term climate change. So what I did is in all of them, you have seasonal variation in water availability that follows the bimodal rainfall patterns of Eastern Africa. But what we also put in with the long-term climate change is this issue of these long periods of drought that would have meant there was little to no water available within the system. And that means that would have possibly limited the amount of sediment that was being transported within the river systems. So you can see from the graphs that you have quite large dips. But what that does is that it means that it's taking the system much longer for sediments to accumulate within an area. What does that mean for an archaeological interpretation is that now we can have an idea that when each of these field systems was being developed, how long would it actually take to build this system of fields? And as you can see from an example, if we had this idea of constant water availability to just take us about 20 to 30 years to build up 1 meter worth of soil, 1 meter worth of sediment. But as you can see, because you have these issues of seasonal variability and long-term climate change, this pushes the timelines further ahead to something about 30 to 40 years. But that means that also makes us think this is only one set of fields, around 56,000 square meters, but you have about 20 kilometers square of a system to develop. That means that you can't be developing a set of fields one at a time. You'll have issues of fields being developed simultaneously across the system. And not only that, you also bring in the idea that we can now use this information to constrain when we think these fields were built. So we have this long time period of between the 12th century to the 18th century on when the field system could have been in use. But now this also gives us a better idea of how long, if it takes us this long to build a series of fields, how long could we possibly be taking to spread across the landscape? And this would support archaeological interpretations of how this system developed. On to now the larger catchment scale system of irrigation management. Now, instead of focusing on how the fields are developing, we're looking at how the patterns of decision-making influence not only where they put their field system, but how that field system spreads. And one of the things that I put in as a scenario is the issue of labor, how energy costs will influence how much area you're planting. And not only that, how these fluctuations in energy costs will affect your decision making in possibly deciding whether or not to irrigate or to expand your field system. And I didn't include it here because if we want to, we can discuss it afterwards. But one of the things I noted is that while their need for food and energy drives their development of these field systems, it also the need for energy to maintain them also constrains them, because you need the energy to plant the fields, you need energy to build the irrigation systems, which requires more energy than maybe switching to a different agricultural practice. So this could have this points towards a potential reason of why this system could have stopped being in use. Was there a point where it reached that the benefits of agricultural production and use of irrigation systems were much lower than the costs required to actually maintain the system? And did they have alternatives, such as moving into pastoralism or moving to another region that was wetter and easier to manage, that led to a slow movement of people out of the area? And those are some of the things that my thesis is now putting together. So this has applications in the development of resource use strategies, because one of the issues, as I've mentioned, one of the biggest issues is the high capital investment required for irrigation. And in a lot of studies, we've found that irrigation systems tend to collapse over time. And that's a big issue because it's a high investment, but it seems to not follow through with mutual benefits to the people who invest in it. And so trying to understand the decision making and the factors that could drive the maintenance and the management of the systems could tie into modern understanding of water management strategies. And in this way, we can develop coping mechanisms and strategies that would be more sustainable and resilient for communities at a local scale and possibly spreading out to a global scale. And this way, they tie to lessons learned that can support irrigation development strategies. And I think I'll leave you there with those thoughts. Thank you for listening.